Have you ever been made to feel small, worthless, like a forgotten chapter in someone else's glorious life story? Cressida Pierce knew that feeling intimately. For 2 years she had been the ghost of her own past, haunted by the man who broke her heart and her spirit. Her ex-husband Lennox was a master of public image, and he had painted her as the drab, uninspired wife he had to shed to find his true, glittering life. Tonight he planned to deliver the final crushing blow, parading his new perfect wife in front of her at the city's most exclusive gala. But he never imagined that the woman he threw away had been secretly rebuilding herself in the shadows, and that her new life was about to intersect with a world of power so immense it would make his entire existence look like a child's sandcastle before a tidal wave. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of resurrection. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a flyer for a discount pizza parlor. It was an anomaly in the landscape of Cressida Pierce's new life, a relic from a world she no longer belonged to. The cardstock was thick, creamy, and impossibly heavy, the kind of paper that whispered of old money and unspoken influence. Engraved in sweeping gold calligraphy were the words, "The St. Jude Children's Foundation Annual Charity Gala." Cressida's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers, stained with a faint trace of turpentine from her work, trembled as she traced the familiar crest at the top. This gala. This was their gala, hers and Lennox's. For 5 consecutive years, it had been the pinnacle of their social calendar. It was the night Lennox Caldwell, rising star in the world of corporate finance, solidified his connections, laughed with the city's elite, and showcased his beautiful, elegant wife. Cressida had played her part perfectly, a graceful accessory in the gilded cage of their marriage. She had chosen the gowns, networked with the wives of his superiors, and smiled until her face ached, all to fuel the ascent of the man she loved. Now, holding the invitation in her small, quiet apartment, a space that was hers and hers alone, paid for with the sweat of her own brow, the memories felt like an assault. The scent of Lennox's ridiculously expensive cologne, the cold weight of the diamond necklace he'd once called her reward for a successful quarter, the low dismissive tone he used when she dared to mention her own dreams. "Art restoration, Kathy, be serious," he'd scoffed one evening, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than her monthly groceries did now. "It's a dusty, pointless hobby. Your job is to support me. Our future is in this boardroom, not some grimy workshop." He had whittled her down piece by piece until her passion for bringing history back to life was nothing more than a secret shame she indulged in when he was away on business trips. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Brittany, a 24-year-old influencer whose entire life was a curated collection of brand deals and vapid, inspirational quotes. Lennox hadn't even had the decency to be discreet. He'd left Cressida with a sterile email from his lawyer and a gnawing emptiness that felt like a physical wound. The divorce had been swift and brutal. He had the better lawyers, the public sympathy he'd manufactured, and the social standing. He took the house, the friends, the life they had built. Cressida was left with a modest settlement that barely covered 6 months of rent and the crushing weight of her own perceived failure. So why, after 2 years of silence, was this invitation here? She scanned the card again, and her heart sank. At the bottom, in smaller print, featuring the unveiling of a restored Renaissance masterpiece, The Veiled Madonna, courtesy of a private benefactor. Her piece. Her Madonna. For the last 18 months, Cressida had poured her soul into that painting. After the divorce, she'd taken what little she had and started a small, one-woman restoration business, Pierce Restoration. She worked out of a cramped studio, taking on small, forgotten pieces from antique shops and minor collectors. It was painstaking, anonymous work. Then, 6 months ago, an inquiry had come through a secure portal from a law firm representing an anonymous client. They had a damaged 16th-century masterpiece and were looking for a restorer with a delicate touch, someone who valued authenticity over speed. They had seen her work on a minor Florentine piece and were impressed. The pay was astronomical enough to secure her business for years. But it was more than that. Working on the Veiled Madonna had been a spiritual journey. In the quiet solitude of her studio with the smell of linseed oil and varnish in the air, she had meticulously cleaned away centuries of grime, re-adhered flaking paint, and brought the serene, sorrowful face of the Madonna back to life. It was as if in healing the canvas she had begun to heal the fractured parts of herself. The client, known to her only as Mr. Chevalier through his lawyers, had been respectful, demanding, and utterly professional. Now he was unveiling his prized possession at the very gala that symbolized her old life. She had to be there. Her contract stipulated her attendance. It was non-negotiable. Her best friend Jenna, a fiery journalist who had been her rock through the divorce, was ecstatic. "This is it, Kath. This is your moment," she'd shouted over the phone. "You are not going as Lennox Caldwell's pathetic ex-wife. You are going as Cressida Pierce, the brilliant artist who restored a masterpiece. You have to rub it in his face. He'll be there, Jenna." With her, Cressida whispered the words tasting like ash. "So let him see you." Not the weeping woman in sweatpants he left, but the incredible woman who is standing on her own 2 feet. This isn't about him anymore. This is about you claiming your victory. Jenna was right. But the thought of seeing Lennox, of feeling his dismissive gaze and seeing Brittany's smug, perfect smile, sent a tremor of pure, unadulterated fear through her. It was one thing to be a success in the quiet anonymity of her studio. It was another to face the architect of her heartbreak in the arena where he was king. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of her apartment. The woman staring back was tired, her face a little thinner, but her eyes held a spark of determination that hadn't been there 2 years ago. She took a deep breath. She would go, not for revenge and not for Lennox. She would go for the woman in the reflection and for the Madonna waiting to be seen. Preparing for the gala felt like excavating an archaeological dig of her former self. In the back of her closet, behind the practical jeans and comfortable sweaters that defined her current life, was a single garment bag. Inside hung the ghost of Cressida Caldwell, a floor-length gown of shimmering navy silk by a designer whose name she could no longer bring herself to say. It had cost a sickening amount of money, purchased for the last gala she'd attended with Lennox. He had picked it out, of course. "It makes you look appropriate," he'd commented, his approval as thin and cold as the fabric itself. She pulled it out. It was a beautiful dress, a testament to a life of effortless luxury, but wearing it now would feel like donning a costume of her own subjugation. It represented everything she was trying to escape, a woman whose value was determined by the man on her arm and the label on her back. With a resolve that surprised her, she zipped the bag shut and pushed it back into the darkness. She would not wear Lennox's armor to this battle. Instead, she went to a high-end consignment shop downtown, a place where the city's elite shed their last season treasures. After an hour of searching, she found it. It was a dress that the old Cressida would never have dared to wear. It was a deep forest green velvet that seemed to drink the light. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and a cut that was deceptively simple, clinging to her form in a way that was elegant and strong rather than overtly seductive. It wasn't a brand that screamed for attention. It was just beautiful. It felt like her. She paired it with a simple pair of pearl earrings, her grandmother's, and the only piece of expensive jewelry she'd fought for in the divorce, a delicate antique silver bracelet. On the night of the gala, a nervous energy buzzed under her skin. She did her own hair and makeup, a skill she'd honed from years of watching professionals. The result wasn't the flawless, sculpted mask she used to wear, but it was authentic. Her reflection showed a woman, not a doll, a woman with a story in her eyes. Taking a taxi instead of the chauffeured town car of her past, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The cab pulled up to the grand entrance of the Museum of Fine Arts, its marble columns illuminated by dramatic spotlights. The familiar scene unfolded before her, the crush of photographers, the flashbulbs painting the night white, the parade of sleek black cars depositing men in tailored tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. For a moment, panic seized her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a mistake. She was an imposter here, a sparrow trying to fly amongst peacocks. What was she thinking? She saw them then, stepping out of a gleaming black Bentley. Lennox looking impossibly handsome and confident in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. And Brittany on his arm, a confection of pale pink chiffon and diamonds, laughing that high tinkling laugh that always seemed to be for an invisible audience. Cressida shrank back in her seat, telling the driver to go around the block. She couldn't do it. She couldn't walk in there and face them. As the cab circled, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the event coordinator. "Ms. Pierce, Mr. Chevalier's assistant is looking for you. He'd like to ensure you are settled in comfortably before the unveiling. Please find Ms. Albright upon your arrival." The name Chevalier was like a splash of cold water. This wasn't about Lennox. This was about her work. This was her professional obligation. Her masterpiece was in that building. She had spent over a year of her life on it. She would not let Lennox Caldwell, a man who couldn't tell a Monet from a placemat, take this night from her too. "Stop here," she told the driver, her voice firm. She paid the fare, stepped out of the cab, and walked not towards the chaotic glamour of the red carpet, but towards a discreet side entrance marked for staff and featured guests. She gave her name to the security guard, who checked his list and nodded respectfully, opening the door for her. Inside, the cacophony of the entrance faded into the sophisticated hum of the event. The air smelled of hothouse flowers and money. Waitstaff moved with silent efficiency, balancing trays of champagne. The vast hall was filled with the city's most powerful people, their conversations a low melodic buzz beneath the soaring vaulted ceilings. And then she saw him. Lennox. He was holding court near the grand staircase, Brittany clinging to his arm, looking up at him with doe-eyed adoration. He was in his element, the center of his universe. Cressida's stomach twisted into a tight knot. She felt a primal urge to turn and flee, to run back to the safety of her small apartment and the comforting smell of turpentine. But then her eyes drifted past him towards the stage at the far end of the hall. Upon it, shrouded in a swathe of dark velvet, was a large rectangular object. Her Madonna. Her purpose. Straightening her shoulders, she lifted her chin. She was no longer Cressida Caldwell, the timid wife. She was Cressida Pierce, the restorer. And she had every right to be here. Taking a flute of champagne from a passing tray, she held it like a shield, and took her first step into the lion's den. She tried to remain inconspicuous, skirting the edges of the crowd, her eyes fixed on the velvet-draped easel on the stage. She was an artist, not a socialite. She just needed to get through the next hour, see her work unveiled, and then slip away before anyone noticed her. But in a room where every glance was a transaction, and every face was catalogued, anonymity was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in." The voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, cut through the ambient noise. Cressida froze, her back rigid. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Lennox. She composed herself, took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, and then turned to face him. He stood there, a smug, predatory grin plastered on his face. Brittany was beside him, her expression a perfect mask of polite curiosity, but her eyes, sharp and critical, were doing a swift, brutal appraisal of Cressida's dress, her hair, her very presence. "Lennox," Cressida said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Brittany, you both look well." "We are," Lennox said, his eyes raking over her. He took in the simple velvet dress, the lack of ostentatious jewelry. His grin widened. It was a look she knew well, the look of a man confirming his own superiority. "I must say, Kathy, I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your kind of scene anymore. Did you get a temp job with the catering staff?" The jab was designed to hurt, to remind her of her fall from grace. The old Cressida would have flushed with shame, stammered a defense, and withered under his scorn. But the woman standing before him now was forged in the fire of his betrayal. "No, Lennox," she replied, her tone cool and even. "I was invited." Brittany let out a little giggle, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. Oh, that's so sweet. I'm sure they send invitations to all their past donors. It's probably a mailing list error, but it's brave of you to come anyway. So brave. The word brave was coded in pity, meant to sting more than any outright insult. They were a team, a tag team of practiced cruelty, and she was their target. Lennox leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for those nearby to hear. Listen, Kathy, I know things have been tough for you. If you're short on cash, you don't have to crash parties for a free meal. Just call my assistant. I can spare something, for old time's sake. The public humiliation was his goal. He wanted the onlookers, his peers and rivals, to see him as magnanimous and her as a charity case. He was rewriting their history in real time, casting himself as the benevolent ex-husband and her as the pathetic, desperate ex-wife who couldn't let go. The blood rushed to her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to lash out to tell him what a hollow, insecure man he truly was. But she remembered Jenna's words. This isn't about him anymore. To lose her temper would be to give him the victory he so desperately craved. So she smiled. It was a small, enigmatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's very generous of you to offer, Lennox, but I'm doing just fine. Fine, he scoffed, gesturing around the opulent hall. This was our life, Kathy. Look at you now. That dress. Did you get it at a thrift store? And you're all alone. It's just sad. I think her dress is lovely, a new voice said, smooth as aged whiskey. All three of them turned. A man had approached their small circle seemingly from nowhere. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a bespoke tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His hair was the color of salt and pepper, and his eyes, a startlingly intense shade of gray, held an air of quiet authority that was palpable. He wasn't boyishly handsome like Lennox. He was something far more compelling. He was powerful. The air around him seemed to crackle with it. He looked directly at Cressida, his gaze ignoring Lennox and Brittany completely. Forest green. It's a bold and intelligent choice. It complements your eyes. Cressida was momentarily speechless. Who was this man? Lennox, however, was not. His face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now clouded with confusion and annoyance. He hated being interrupted, hated being upstaged even more. I'm sorry, do we know you? Lennox asked, his tone brusque. The man's gray eyes finally shifted to Lennox, and they were utterly devoid of warmth. I don't believe we've had the pleasure, he said, his voice polite but dismissive. He then turned his full attention back to Cressida. You must be Ms. Pierce. I've been looking for you. Cressida's mind raced. Ms. Pierce. How did he know her name? Before she could answer, the man extended a hand. Dominic Chevalier. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. Chevalier. The name hit Cressida like a lightning bolt. Mr. Chevalier, her anonymous benefactor, the owner of the Madonna. The blood drained from Lennox's face. He knew the name, of course. Everyone in this room knew the name Dominic Chevalier. He was a titan of industry, a reclusive billionaire known for his ruthless business acumen and his world-class art collection. He was a legend, a man who rarely attended public events and whose influence dwarfed Lennox's own considerable success into insignificance. Lennox Caldwell was a player in the city. Dominic Chevalier owned the game. You're Cressida's client. Lennox stammered the words, catching in his throat. Dominic's gaze flickered back to Lennox, cold and sharp as splintered ice. He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he offered his arm to Cressida. Ms. Pierce, would you allow me to escort you? We have a masterpiece to unveil. Without a second glance at her stunned ex-husband or his gaping new wife, Cressida placed her hand on Dominic Chevalier's arm. As he led her away, she could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her, but for the first time, she felt none of their judgment. The venom of Lennox's smile had been rendered utterly impotent. The game had just changed, and he didn't even know the rules. Walking through the crowded ballroom on Dominic Chevalier's arm was a surreal experience. The sea of powerful people parted for them as if by an invisible force. The whispers that had followed her earlier, tinged with pity and speculation, now morphed into a buzz of frantic curiosity. Men who had looked through her minutes before now nodded in deference. Women who had sized her up with disdain now watched with undisguised envy. She was no longer an anonymous ghost. She was a mystery, and in this world, mystery was a form of currency. Dominic guided her to a cordoned-off area near the stage where a few chairs were reserved. He was a perfect gentleman, attentive but not overbearing. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said in a low voice, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "I overheard your former acquaintance." His lack of grace is surpassed only by his lack of perception. Cressida felt a blush creep up her neck. "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Chevalier. Please call me Dominic." "And yes, I did," he replied, his gaze firm. "Talent should be protected from arrogance. And your talent, Ms. Pierce, is generational." His words were so sincere, so direct, they left her momentarily breathless. Lennox had only ever praised her for how she reflected on him. Dominic was praising her for who she was. A hush fell over the room as the event's master of ceremonies, a local news anchor, took the stage. He spoke for a few minutes about the foundation, about the importance of charity, and then he began the introduction. Cressida had been both dreading and anticipating, and now for the moment we've all been waiting for. Tonight we are privileged to witness the public debut of a long-lost Renaissance treasure, the Veiled Madonna. This masterpiece has been brought back to its former glory thanks to the generosity of its owner, the esteemed Mr. Dominic Chevalier, and the breathtaking skill of a truly remarkable artist. Cressida's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Mr. Chevalier has broken with tradition tonight. The world of art restoration is often one of quiet behind-the-scenes work, but he believes that genius of this caliber deserves to be celebrated. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the woman who saved the Madonna, Ms. Cressida Pierce. A polite, then growingly enthusiastic round of applause filled the hall. A spotlight found her. For a terrifying second she was frozen, pinned by the light and the attention of hundreds of people. She felt Dominic's hand give her a gentle, reassuring squeeze on her arm. "Go on," he murmured. "Take your bow. You've earned it." She walked up the small set of stairs to the stage, her legs feeling like they were made of jelly. The light was blinding, and she could only see the first few rows of faces. And there in the front row where the most important donors were seated was Lennox. His face was a mask of utter uncomprehending shock. Brittany sat beside him, her jaw practically on the floor, her perfectly applied lipstick forming a small O of disbelief. They had thought she was a caterer, a charity case, and now she was the guest of honor. The whiplash of it was written all over their faces. The MC gestured to her. "Ms. Pierce, would you do us the honor?" With trembling hands, Cressida walked over to the velvet-draped easel. She took hold of the heavy fabric. This was it. This was not for them. This was for her. She pulled the velvet away. A collective gasp swept through the audience. There, under the warm glow of the stage lights, was the Veiled Madonna. The painting was luminous. Cressida had not just cleaned it, she had resurrected it. The Madonna's face, once obscured by centuries of yellowed varnish and grime, now radiated a serene, heartbreaking beauty. The sorrow in her eyes was palpable, yet it was imbued with a profound sense of grace and resilience. The deep blues of her robe were vibrant. The delicate gold leaf of her halo shimmered with an inner light. It wasn't just a restored painting. It was a soul laid bare on canvas. For a long moment the room was utterly silent, captivated by the image. Then the applause started. It wasn't the polite clapping from before. It was a thunderous, rolling ovation. It was a genuine, awe-inspired acknowledgement of the beauty they were witnessing. Cressida stood beside her work, tears welling in her eyes. This was the validation she had craved for years. Not from a man, not from society, but from her own craft. It was the public declaration that the passion Lennox had dismissed as a dusty hobby was in fact a rare and powerful gift. From the front row she watched Lennox. He was clapping, but it was a mechanical, empty gesture. His eyes were wide, darting from the painting to Cressida and back again. The cogs were turning in his brain, the world reconfiguring itself around a truth he couldn't possibly comprehend. He had thrown away a diamond, believing it to be a common stone. And now he was watching it glitter in a setting so far beyond his reach, it might as well have been a star in the night sky. The smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by the pale dawning horror of a monumental miscalculation. As the ovation began to subside, Dominic Chevalier ascended the stage. He moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention without demanding it. He didn't just walk, he occupied space. The audience quieted instantly, eager to hear from the reclusive billionaire. He stood beside Cressida, though he didn't address the audience at first. He simply looked at the painting, his expression one of profound reverence. "Extraordinary," he murmured, his voice just for her. "Even more so than in your studio." Then he turned to the microphone. "Thank you all." He began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the hall effortlessly. "Tonight is about supporting the vital work of the St. Jude Foundation, and I thank you for your generosity. But it is also about celebrating the preservation of beauty and history." He gestured towards the painting. "I acquired the Veiled Madonna a year ago. It was in a deplorable state, neglected, damaged its soul, hidden beneath layers of decay. Many experts told me it was a lost cause. They suggested a team of restorers, famous names from famous institutions who would take years and charge a fortune to do what they called a salvage job." He paused, his gray eyes sweeping across the room, finally landing for a fraction of a second on Lennox Caldwell. "But I wasn't looking for a salvage job. I was looking for a resurrection. I was looking for a single artist with not just the skill, but the empathy, the soul to understand what this painting needed. Someone who knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to hold immense value while being dismissed as worthless." Cressida's breath hitched. Was he talking about the painting, or was he talking about her? "My search led me to Ms. Cressida Pierce." Dominic continued, turning to face her. The warmth in his eyes was staggering. "It led me to a small, unassuming studio where true magic was being performed. Ms. Pierce doesn't just restore paint. She restores spirit. She has a gift that cannot be taught in any university. She listens to the story the artwork wants to tell. She looked at this broken, forgotten Madonna and saw not what it was, but what it always had been. She saw its strength, its grace, its resilience. And with a touch that is nothing short of miraculous, she brought it back to us." He took Cressida's hand. His grip was warm and firm. "The art world is filled with technicians. Ms. Pierce is a visionary. This city is fortunate to have her. I am fortunate to have found her. Thank you, Cressida, for giving the Madonna her voice back." He began to applaud, and the room joined him, the sound even more deafening than before. It was an ovation not just for the painting, but for her, for Cressida Pierce. Lennox's dismissal of her passion echoed in her mind, a dusty, pointless hobby, and it sounded so foolish, so utterly ignorant, that she almost laughed. As Dominic led her off the stage, the night became a blur. People surged forward, a constellation of the city's most influential figures, all clamoring for an introduction. Curators from the museum, wealthy collectors, art critics, they all wanted to talk to her, to praise her work, to ask about her process. She answered their questions, her voice gaining confidence with each interaction. She spoke of pigment composition and the challenges of removing 18th century varnish without damaging the original 16th century glaze. She was an expert in her field, and for the first time she was being seen as one. Through it all, Dominic remained by her side, a quiet, formidable presence. He deflected the overly aggressive, facilitated introductions with the insightful, and ensured her champagne glass was never empty. She caught a glimpse of Lennox across the room. He was standing alone, Brittany having been absorbed by a gaggle of other young, beautiful wives. He was watching Cressida, his expression a toxic cocktail of fury, bewilderment, and something she had never seen on his face before, regret. He looked like a man who had just watched his losing lottery ticket get struck by lightning. Later, in a quieter moment near the terrace, Cressida finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Dominic, your speech. You said you were looking for someone who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. How could you have known?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "My firm does extensive due diligence before engaging in any significant contract, Ms. Pierce, especially one involving an asset of this value. I don't just research a person's professional history, I research their character. I read about your divorce. I read the slanderous one-sided articles that your ex-husband's publicist planted in the society pages. I saw the narrative he tried to create." He met her gaze. His own eyes filled with a surprising depth of understanding. "And then I saw your work. And I realized that the man who wrote that narrative was a fool. He was a man who owned a priceless work of art and kept it in a dark, dusty attic because he was too blind to see its worth. I simply provided the gallery it deserved." The directness of his analogy, the sheer breathtaking validation of it, struck Cressida to her core. He hadn't just hired a restorer. He had truly seen her, and had orchestrated this entire night, not just to unveil his painting, but to unveil her. The scale of his quiet, calculated vindication on her behalf was almost too much to comprehend. It was then that she saw Lennox approaching them, his face a thunderous mask. He had finally decided he couldn't stand being irrelevant in her story any longer. He was coming to reclaim his place, to stake his claim, to remind her of who she used to be. The old fear flickered inside her, the conditioned response to his anger. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't alone. Lennox stormed towards them, his movements stiff with fury. The practiced charm he wore like a second skin had vanished, leaving behind the raw, ugly entitlement that Cressida knew so well. He ignored Dominic completely, his eyes locked on her, blazing with a possessive anger that made her skin crawl. "Cressida, we need to talk," he said, his voice a low, commanding growl. He didn't ask, he ordered. It was the same tone he'd used 1,000 times to end an argument, to summon her, to put her in her place. Before Cressida could even form a response, Dominic stepped slightly forward, a subtle but unmistakable movement that placed him between her and Lennox. "I don't believe Ms. Pierce has anything to say to you, Mr. Caldwell." Lennox's jaw tightened. He finally acknowledged the other man, his eyes narrowing with contempt. "This is a private matter. It's between me and Cressida. You have no idea what our history is." "On the contrary," Dominic replied, his voice dangerously soft, "I have an excellent idea of your history. And from what I can surmise, it's a history Ms. Pierce is rightly putting behind her." The blatant dismissal sent a wave of dark red flushing up Lennox's neck. He was a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. To be so thoroughly and calmly neutered by Dominic Chevalier was a public emasculation he couldn't bear. He turned his venom back to Cressida, his voice dripping with false intimacy. "Kathy, don't be foolish," he hissed, trying to draw her in. "Don't you see what this is? He's using you. Men like him, they collect pretty things. He's just bought himself a new toy. You restored his painting, now you're the flavor of the month. Don't throw away what we had for this. I discovered you. Everything you learned about this world you learned with me." It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim ownership of her narrative, to position himself as her creator. The audacity of it, after years of belittling her passion, was staggering. Cressida felt a cold, clear anger rise within her, silencing the last vestiges of her fear. "You didn't discover me, Lennox," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. "You tried to bury me." The truth of her words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Lennox's face contorted a mixture of rage and desperation. He was losing control, losing the audience, losing the last shred of power he had over her. He reached out his hand, grasping for her arm. "Cressida, stop this nonsense," and he never finished the sentence. In one smooth, deliberate motion, Dominic moved. He didn't push Lennox. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to Cressida, his intense gray eyes searching hers. He saw the flicker of old fear she was trying to fight, He saw the new strength warring with years of conditioning, and in that moment he made a decision. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. The noisy gala seemed to fade into a distant hum. The world narrowed to the space between them. "You are a masterpiece, Cressida Pierce," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of fiery romantic passion. It was something far more profound. It was a kiss of respect, of protection, of unwavering support. It was a silent public declaration. It said, "She is with me. She is valued. She is off limits." It was a shield and a coronation all in one. For Cressida, it was a moment of absolute stillness. The warmth of his lips was a startling grounding reality. It was the antithesis of Lennox's cold transactional affection. This was a kiss that gave rather than took, and across from them, Lennox froze. It was a total system failure. His body went rigid. His hand, which had been reaching for Cressida, dropped to his side as if it had been severed. His mouth hung slightly open. His eyes, wide with disbelief, were locked on the sight of Dominic Chevalier, the most powerful man in the room, kissing the ex-wife he had just tried to humiliate. The world around Lennox didn't just stop. It shattered. Every calculation he had ever made about his life, his status, and his ex-wife was rendered spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. The narrative he controlled so carefully had been hijacked and rewritten in a single silent gesture. He wasn't the powerful man benevolently pitying his pathetic ex. He was the fool. The colossal blind fool who had thrown away a treasure that was now being claimed by a king. The flash of a photographer's camera from across the room broke the spell. The pop of light illuminated Lennox's face, capturing his expression of pure, unadulterated shock for posterity. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a sickly pale gray. He looked from Cressida to Dominic and back again, his mind frantically trying to process the new reality. He was no longer the main character in this story. He was a footnote. The kiss ended. Dominic didn't release her immediately, keeping his hands on her arms, as if to steady her. He looked down at her, a question in his eyes. Cressida gave him the smallest of nods, a silent thank you. When she finally looked back at her ex-husband, she felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, not even anger. He was just a man, small and insignificant, frozen in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The hold he'd had on her for more than a decade was well and truly broken. The aftermath of the kiss was not a loud explosion, but a seismic shift that altered the room's social landscape in a single silent moment. The collective gasp had been replaced by a frantic electric hum of whispers. Phones previously hidden were now held at discreet angles, capturing the tableau, Dominic protective and resolute beside Cressida. Cressida stunned but steady, and Lennox a statue carved from rage and disbelief. He was the epicenter of the shockwave, and the crowd, like animals sensing a predator's weakness, began to pull away from him. Alliances built over years of sycophantic handshakes and boisterous backslapping evaporated in seconds. Brittany, who had just returned to his side, saw it all. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of youthful beauty, crumbled. She looked at Lennox not with love or concern, but with the cold horror of a stockholder watching her portfolio turn to ash. "Lennox," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for him. "Do something. Everyone is staring." But Lennox couldn't move. He was trapped in the Klieg light of his own public demolition. His mind, usually so quick with a cutting remark or a dismissive sneer, was a blank slate of white-hot fury. He had been outplayed in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The first flash of a professional camera from a society columnist near the entrance broke his paralysis. It was a predatory sound, the click of the shutter like a vulture snapping its beak. That was the signal. Their night was over. Their reign was over. "We're leaving," he snarled finally, looking at Brittany. He grabbed her elbow, his grip far from the gentle possessive hold he usually displayed. It was angry and bruising. "Now!" He didn't spare another glance for Cressida. To look at her again would be to acknowledge the full catastrophic scale of his misjudgment, and his ego couldn't withstand that. He bulldozed his way through the crowd, dragging a stumbling Brittany behind him. Their exit was not the grand stately departure of a power couple, but the hasty, shameful retreat of the utterly defeated. Cressida watched them go, but she felt a strange, disconnected calm. The maelstrom of drama felt like it was happening behind a thick pane of glass. Dominic's hand on the small of her back was a warm, grounding presence, an anchor in the swirling currents of gossip. "Let's get some air," he said, his voice a low murmur against the rising chatter. He expertly guided her away from the center of the room, his body acting as a subtle shield against the curious stares and pointing fingers. The path he chose was not towards the main exit, but through a side door she hadn't noticed, which led to a long, quiet gallery hall. The noise of the gala faded behind them, replaced by the reverent silence of the museum at night. They walked past sleeping portraits and shadowed sculptures, the only sound the soft tap of her heels on the polished marble floor. Finally, he pushed open a set of heavy glass doors and they stepped out onto a private terrace. The cool night air was a blessing, washing over Cressida and clearing the last lingering traces of the ballroom's cloying atmosphere. Below them, the city sprawled out a breathtaking tapestry of glittering lights and dark, snaking streets. It was the same view she had seen from Lennox's penthouse for years, but from here it felt different. It wasn't a kingdom to be conquered. It was a world of infinite possibility. "Are you all right?" Dominic asked again, his voice gentle as he came to stand beside her at the stone balustrade. Cressida took a deep shuddering breath and let it out slowly. "I am," she said, the words feeling truer and more profound than she could have imagined. "More than all right. I feel quiet." She turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you. For all of it. You didn't have to do any of that." "There is no need to thank me for recognizing the truth," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I've spent my life in rooms like that, Cressida. They are jungles of ego and insecurity where people claw for dominance. Men like your ex-husband build their sense of self by diminishing others. I merely held a mirror up to the situation." He turned to her, a flicker of something stern and protective in his eyes. "And I have very little tolerance for bullies." They stood in a comfortable silence for a while, the city's hum a soothing soundtrack. "You know." Cressida mused, her voice soft and thoughtful. "The most infuriating part is that he will probably convince himself that I did all of this for him. For revenge. To make him jealous. He'll make it part of his story with him as the tragic hero." Dominic's expression was unreadable. Does it matter what he thinks? The question, so simple and direct, struck her with the force of a revelation. For years, Lennox's opinion had been the sun her entire world orbited. His approval was warmth and life. His disapproval was a freezing, desolate winter. The thought of his judgment had dictated her clothes, her friends, her ambitions, her very sense of self. And now, she thought of Lennox's enraged, humiliated face as he fled the party. She felt no triumph, no pity, not even a lingering flicker of anger. She felt nothing. He was just a man, a ghost from a past she no longer inhabited. His opinion was now as relevant to her as a distant dying star, whose light had taken years to travel to her, only to arrive after she had already turned to face a new sun. "No," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "It doesn't matter at all." "I commissioned you, Cressida," Dominic said, his voice pulling her back to the present, "because your preliminary analysis of the painting was the most insightful I had ever read. You wrote about the artist's use of underpainting to convey a grief that was meant to be felt rather than seen. No other expert noticed that. It was then I knew you were the one. Your personal history was irrelevant to my decision, but it made me determined to ensure that your re-emergence into this world was on your own terms. Everything tonight. It was simply a matter of ensuring your work, and by extension, you were given the respect you command." He was meticulously deconstructing the night for her, ensuring she understood that this wasn't a fairy tale rescue. Her talent was the cause, his admiration was the effect. He hadn't swooped in to save a damsel. He had invested in a master and was now protecting his investment. It was a gesture of profound professional and personal respect, more valuable than any chivalrous act. As the hour grew late, they walked back through the silent museum. When he arranged for his personal driver to take her home, he walked her to the car himself. As the uniformed driver held the door open, Dominic took her hand, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. "There is a small private gallery in Soho I'm thinking of acquiring." He said, his tone casual, but his eyes were intent and serious. "It's been mismanaged for years, filled with fashionable derivative works. It has no soul. I want to change that. It needs a new curator. Someone with an impeccable eye and an understanding of an artwork's soul. Someone who can find the hidden masterpieces the rest of the world has overlooked." It wasn't just a job offer. It was a mission statement. It was a new canvas. He was offering her a space to use her unique gift, not just to restore old works, but to discover new ones. To build something. Cressida looked at this powerful, intelligent man, then thought of her small apartment, her quiet studio, and the life she had painstakingly rebuilt for herself, piece by tiny piece. This offer was a doorway into a world she'd only dreamed of. But this time she wouldn't be entering as a +1 and accessory. She would be entering it through the front door with her name, Cressida Pierce, on the letterhead, celebrated for the work of her own hands and the vision of her own mind. A radiant, genuine smile lit up her face, a smile that came from a place of deep, hard-won peace. "I think," she said, her voice full of a hope and excitement she hadn't felt in years, "that I would be very interested in hearing more." As the sleek car pulled away from the Grand Museum, Cressida looked out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver. She wasn't leaving a battlefield behind. She was leaving behind a monument to her past life, a past she had now finally fully laid to rest. The road ahead was unknown, an unpainted canvas waiting for its first stroke. But for the first time in a very long time, she was holding the brush. Cressida's story isn't just about a woman finding a new man. It's about a woman finding herself again. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is not defined by who we are with, but by who we are. She walked into that gala as a ghost of someone else's past, but she walked out as the architect of her own future. Her victory wasn't in Lennox's humiliation, but in her own quiet, unshakable self-worth, a value that was finally recognized by someone who could see the masterpiece underneath the grime. This story proves that the greatest comebacks are not loud and vengeful, but are built stroke by stroke in the quiet dedication to our own passions and our own truth. What did you think of Cressida's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you realized your own strength after being underestimated? Let us know in the comments below. If her story of resilience and empowerment inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of triumph. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for watching.